Amara Cole is slumped against a rusted shipping container, her denim jacket soaked through, half with the icy Seoul rain, half with the blood of the man she just broke. Beside her, Madam Kong Sun-hee, silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the rope burns on her wrists, is whispering into a phone with the authority of an empress. Hours ago, Amara was just another shadow in the shipping yard. A woman with a redacted past, a fake name, and a vow to never touch a weapon again. Then the screaming started. Amara should have kept walking. She should have melted into the fog and let the city swallow her whole. But her father's voice, the voice of an army ranger, echoed in the silence. A soldier doesn't ignore a civilian in a crossfire. So she didn't just move, she hunted. 3 kidnappers, 2 tactical knives, and 45 seconds of absolute carnage. Amara took a grazing bullet to the ribs and shattered a collarbone. But the grandmother of Korea's most calculated monster is breathing. The woman's name is Madam Kong, the only soul who can look the CO of death in the eye. And right now she's calling her grandson. Black sedans scream into the yard, tires throwing up gravel. Doors slam in unison. Kong Jun-suk steps out, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the flickering yard lights. He doesn't look like a gangster. He looks like a man who just bought a new soul. Amara Cole just became the permanent shadow of the most dangerous man in Seoul. She just doesn't know the price of her debt yet. Hello Story Fam. Welcome back. Today's tale is a masterclass in tactical justice and dangerous debts. If you love a protagonist who is as lethal as she is loyal, please like and hit that subscribe button. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see where the global squad is at. Grab your popcorn. Let's dive in. 6 hours earlier. The fluorescent hum of the shipping yard office is the only thing keeping Amara awake. Her knuckles are scarred, hidden under the sleeves of her worn denim. She stares at a flickering computer screen. Container 402 cleared. Container 403 pending. Her phone buzzes. A restricted number. She doesn't pick up. She knows who it is, the ghosts of the Pentagon, or maybe the private contractor she walked away from in DC. Her bank account shows just enough for a bowl of jjajangmyeon and next month's rent in her tiny rooftop room. She exhales a cloud of mist in the cold air and grabs her flashlight. The graveyard shift waits. The yard is a labyrinth of steel. Amara tosses a stray bolt into the shadows. The sound echoes. Then she hears it. Not a scream but the muffled rhythmic thumping of someone kicking the inside of a van. Amara's pulse jumps to 120 beats per minute. Her tactical brain, the one she tried to kill, reboots instantly. Every instinct says, stay hidden. You're a ghost here. One police report and they find out who you really are. But then she sees her. Madam Kong trapped between 3 men in tactical gear. One man raises a hand to strike the elderly woman. Amara's breath hitches. Her training overrides her fear. You don't strike the innocent. Not on her watch. Amara drops her flashlight. It shatters, plunging the corner into darkness. She reaches into her cargo pants, pulling out a heavy industrial wrench. It's not the Glock she used to carry, but in her hands it's a death sentence. Leave her. Amara growls, her voice low and dangerous, vibrating with a disciplined aggression that freezes the kidnappers in their tracks. The first man reaches for a sidearm. Amara doesn't wait. She lunges. She isn't swinging wildly. She is a surgeon of violence. The wrench connects with a sickening crack. The man is down before he can scream. The second man draws a knife. Amara pivots, using her denim jacket to wrap his arm, snapping his wrist in one fluid motion. The third man levels his pistol. Amara's world slows down. The impossible hero has arrived, and the game of chess in Seoul is about to get a new queen. The antiseptic bite of the private ward was a far cry from the salt and grease of the shipping yard. Amara shifted in the bed, a sharp hiss escaping her teeth as the bandages around her ribs pulled tight. Every muscle in her body felt like it had been tenderized with a sledgehammer, but her eyes remained locked on the door. She didn't have to wait long. The door glided open with a silent, expensive precision. Kong Jun-suk didn't walk into the room. He occupied it. He was a vision of monochrome lethalness, His black suit tailored so sharply it looked like it could draw blood. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes were flat, devoid of the frantic gratitude Amara expected. He didn't look like a man whose world had just been saved. He looked like a scientist examining a specimen that had unexpectedly survived a lethal dose of radiation. He stopped at the foot of her bed, his hands clasped behind his back. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. He didn't offer a name, a handshake, or a thank you. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. "Amara Cole," he said, the syllables falling like stones into a deep well. "Former tactical security. Discharged with a redacted record. You've spent 3 years living as a ghost in my city. And yet tonight you chose to haunt my enemies." Amara's pulse spiked, but she kept her face a mask of stone. She was an old woman being dragged into a van. "I didn't care whose grandmother she was." "And that," Jun-suk replied, his voice a terrifyingly calm whisper, "is your primary error. You saved the only woman I value, but in doing so, you revealed your face to the director's elite cleaners. By noon your fingerprints will be on every dark web hit list in East Asia." He stepped closer, the light catching the rim of his glasses. "You humiliated men who do not allow themselves to be humiliated by ghosts. You cannot go back to your shipping containers, Amara. You are already dead. You just haven't stopped breathing yet." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a single thick card. It wasn't an invitation, it was a sentence. "I don't like debts. They are variables I cannot control. So I am offering you a trade. My legal team will erase the ghost and provide you with a new untouchable identity. I will house you, clothe you, and provide the medical care your family in the States desperately needs." Amara's jaw tightened. "And the price?" "Ownership," he said simply. "You become my shadow. You will be the shield for my grandmother and the blade at my side. You will be my fiancé in public and my enforcer in private. You will belong to the Kong estate forever." He leaned down, his shadow falling over her. "The alternative is simple. I walk out that door, and the men you maim tonight will find you before the sun hits the Han River. You are a tactical woman, Amara. Calculate the odds. Choose your cage." The transition from the sterile hospital ward to the Kong estate felt like moving from one prison to another, albeit one lined with silk and ancient porcelain. Amara walked through the vaulted hallways of the mansion, her boots sounding heavy and out of place against the polished hardwood. Her ribs still throbbed, a constant reminder of the alleyway, but her real discomfort came from the woman waiting for her in the sun-drenched tea room. Madame Kong's son, he sat perfectly upright, a porcelain cup held between fingers that showed no trace of the trembling Amara had seen during the kidnapping. The red Chanel blazer had been replaced by a deep emerald hanbok, but the sharp, observant glint in her eyes remained the same. She didn't look at Amara's bruised face. She looked at her posture. "Sit, child," the matriarch commanded, her voice like velvet wrapped around steel. Amara lowered herself into the low chair, her movements stiff, her hand reflexively hovering near the waist of her cargo pants where a holster used to be. Sunhee's eyes followed the movement and a small, knowing smile played on her lips. "You are looking for a weight that is no longer there. In this house we do not carry iron. We carry ourselves." Amara frowned, her tactical mind scanning the exits. "Respectfully, madam, poise didn't stop those men from dragging you into a van. My fist did." The older woman set her tea down with a click that echoed through the room. "Your fist saved my life, yes. But it cannot save your future. My grandson sees you as a weapon, a sharp American blade he can unsheathe when his enemies grow bold. But a blade is a tool. Tools are used until they break, and then they are discarded." She leaned forward, the pearls at her neck catching the light. "If you wish to survive the vipers in this city, you must stop being a weapon and start being the hand that moves it. In our world, poise is the most dangerous weapon of all. It is the ability to walk into a room full of people who want you dead and make them apologize for the inconvenience." For the next 3 hours, the lesson wasn't about combat. It was about the choreography of power. Sunhee corrected the tilt of Amara's chin and the tension in her shoulders. She explained that a loud voice was a sign of weakness, and a hurried step was a confession of fear. By the time Jun-suk walked in that evening, his analytical gaze sliding over them, Amara didn't reach for a weapon. She simply met his eyes, her back straight and her expression unreadable. Sun-hee nodded toward her grandson, her voice quiet but absolute. She is a fast learner, Jun-suk. Soon, she will not just be your shadow. She will be the sun that creates it. Amara felt a shift in the room's gravity. The first time she realized that the grandma wasn't just a target to be protected. She was the architect of the entire empire. The chandelier-lit ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Seoul was a sea of silk, predatory smiles and high-stakes whispers. Amara stood a pace behind Madame Sun-hee, her tactical cargo pants replaced by a floor-length gown of midnight navy. The fabric was heavy enough to conceal the ceramic blade strapped to her thigh, but light enough to move when the air turned sour. Her skin felt itchy under the gaze of the corporate elite, but she remembered the grandma's lesson. Poise is a weapon. She kept her chin level, her breathing rhythmic, and her eyes scanning the room with the calculated coldness of a hawk. Kang Jun-suk was across the floor, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light as he dissected a merger with a rival director. He looked every bit the CEO, but Amara saw the way his hand hovered near his jacket, a predator in a three-piece suit. The threat didn't come from a darkened corner. It came from the center of the room. A waiter, moving with a grace that was a fraction too disciplined for service staff, approached Sun-hee with a tray of crystal flutes. Amara's internal alarm went from a hum to a roar. She noticed the slight bulge beneath the waiter's white vest and the way his eyes never left the grandma's throat. As he reached out, the tray tilted, a deliberate distraction. Beneath the falling crystal, a suppressed pistol slid into his palm. Amara didn't scream. She didn't ruin the music or the mood. She moved. In one fluid motion, she stepped into the waiter's personal space, her hand snapping out to catch his wrist before the barrel could clear the tray. With her other hand, she gripped a full glass of champagne, holding it perfectly level as she drove her knee into the man's solar plexus. The air left him in a silent wheeze. She twisted his arm with a sickening pop, the pistol falling into her waiting hand before it could hit the carpet. The struggle lasted exactly 4 seconds. To the surrounding guests, it looked like an intimate, hurried conversation. Amara leaned in close to the assassin's ear, her voice a low, lethal vibration. "You chose the wrong room tonight." She signaled to Jun-suk's hidden security with a sharp nod. As they swarmed in to drag the man away into the shadows, Amara stepped back to Sun-hee's side. She hadn't broken a sweat. She hadn't raised her voice. And as she took a slow, deliberate sip of the champagne she had held throughout the entire struggle, she realized there wasn't a single drop spilled on her dress. Jun-suk watched her from across the room, his unblinking gaze lingering on her for a heartbeat longer than usual. He didn't smile, but he adjusted his glasses, a silent acknowledgement that his shadow was becoming something far more dangerous than a mere bodyguard. She was a master of the game. The penthouse was silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of a cooling engine on the terrace and the distant hum of Seoul's midnight traffic. Kang Jun-suk sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, a bottle of expensive, amber-hued whiskey open on the table, but he hadn't poured a glass. He was staring at his reflection in the dark glass, the corporate mask still firmly in place. Amara entered the room, her footsteps silent. She had changed back into her tactical gear. The weight of the ceramic blade against her thigh felt more honest than the silk gown she had discarded. She stopped a respectful distance away, her eyes tracing the tension in his shoulders. "The waiter was a professional," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a whetstone. "His muscle memory was military. Someone high up in the board leaked your grandmother's schedule." Jun-suk didn't turn around. Instead, he reached up with a slow, deliberate motion and removed his wire-rimmed glasses. He set them on the table with a sharp clack. When he finally turned to face her, Amara felt a cold shiver trace her spine. Without the glass barrier, his eyes weren't just analytical, they were predatory. The CEO had vanished, replaced by a man who looked like he had walked out of the deepest circles of the underworld. The calculated calm was still there, but it was now backed by a raw, jagged edge of violence. "I know who it was," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a low, dangerous vibration. "In chess, you sacrifice a pawn to see where the opponent's hand moves. I let the director believe my grandmother was vulnerable just to see who in my inner circle would flinch." Amara stepped closer, her brow furrowing. "You used her as bait? Your own blood." "I used myself," he corrected, standing up and closing the distance between them until he was deep in her personal space. She knew the plan. She chose the role. In this world, Amara, the only way to catch a traitor is to offer them a neck they can't resist cutting. He looked at her then, his gaze raking over her face, not as a boss looking at an employee, but as a general acknowledging a fellow soldier. "You were the only variable I didn't plan for. Your disciplined aggression is the only thing that wasn't on my board." He reached out, his thumb tracing the faint bruise on her jaw from the gala struggle. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a tactical assessment of damage. "You fight like someone who has nothing to lose, yet you protect like someone who has everything to guard." "Why?" "Because a ghost only has her honor," Amara replied, her gaze unblinking. Jun-suk leaned in, his breath ghosting over her skin. For a moment, the air between them was thick with a shared, violent understanding. "Then keep your honor, Shadow. But remember, when the glasses come off, the game ends and the hunt begins. Tomorrow we stop playing defense." In that raw moment, the contract between them shifted. She wasn't just his property. She was the only one allowed to see the beast behind the glass. The transition from hunter to hunted happened in the space of a single heartbeat. By sunrise, Amara's face was no longer a secret. It was a currency. The director had bypassed the boardrooms and gone straight to the dark web, pinning a multi-million-dollar bounty on the Black Shadow, who had dared to touch his operatives. To the underworld of Seoul, Amara Cole wasn't a person anymore. She was a winning lottery ticket. The first attempt came at a rain-slicked intersection in Gangnam. Amara was behind the wheel of a black sedan, transporting Madame Sunhee back from a private clinic, when a delivery motorcycle didn't just swerve, it accelerated. Her tactical brain, sharpened by years of high-stakes survival, registered the glint of a submachine gun before the rider even raised his arm. "Get down!" Amara barked, her voice a whip crack of authority. She didn't slam the brakes. She floored the gas. The sedan roared, its armored frame broadsiding the bike into a concrete pillar in a spray of sparks and twisted metal. But the street was already closing in. Two more SUVs veered out of traffic, flanking them like wolves. The elegant streets of the city had transformed into a kill zone. Amara steered with one hand, her knuckles white against the leather, while the other reached for the heavy pistol Jun-suk had insisted she carry. The poise Sunhee had taught her was still there, but it was now fueled by a cold, disciplined rage. Every turn was a calculation, every narrow alley a tactical gamble. She drifted the heavy car through a crowded market, the scent of street food and ozone filling the cabin as bullets shattered the side mirrors. "They are relentless, son," he whispered from the floorboards, her voice remarkably steady. "They're expensive," Amara corrected, her eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. "The director isn't just trying to kill me. He's trying to bankrupt your grandson's reputation by showing he can't protect his own." She pulled a hard J-turn, tires shrieking against the asphalt, and leveled her weapon. 3 shots, 3 shattered engines. The pursuers became a pileup of smoking steel in her wake. But as she sped toward the safety of the Kong stronghold, the city felt different. The neon lights seemed sharper, the shadows deeper. Every pedestrian was a potential shooter, every idling car a ticking bomb. Amara realized then that the shadow contract wasn't just about a fake engagement or a bespoke suit. It was a baptism in blood. She was no longer a ghost hiding in a shipping yard. She was the center of a storm that was tearing Seoul apart. And as the gates of the estate hissed shut behind them, she knew the hunt wouldn't end until the director's head was the one with the price on it. The tension inside the Kong stronghold had reached a fever pitch, but the true threat wasn't coming from the street. It was breathing the same filtered air as the family. Amara sat in the darkened security hub, her eyes burning from hours of reviewing encrypted logs. She wasn't looking for outsiders. She was looking for a ghost in the machine. Then she found the digital fingerprint, a localized bypass code used only by the inner circle. The data trail led directly to Han Jae-ol, Jun-suk's most trusted lieutenant and childhood friend. Amara leaned back, the blue light of the monitors casting sharp angles across her face. Han Jae-ol was the man who stood at Jun-suk's right hand during every board meeting, the one who handled the family's most sensitive logistical routes. He hadn't just leaked a location. He had sold Madame Sunhee's life for a seat at the director's table. Her first instinct was to go to the penthouse, to show Jun-suk the betrayal and let the beast handle the execution. But she hesitated, her tactical mind calculating the fallout. Jun-suk operated on logic and cold variables, but Han Jae-ol was his only blind spot. If she told him now, Jun-suk might hesitate, or worse, Han Jae-ol would see the shift in the boss's demeanor and vanish before the trap could be sprung. Trust is a luxury you can't afford in a war, her father's voice whispered. Madame Sunhee's lessons on poise echoed in her mind. If she went to Jun-suk, she was still just a reporter, a shadow following orders. But if she handled it herself, she was an architect of the empire's safety. Amara closed the laptop with a soft final click. She wouldn't tell the boss, not yet. She would play the game the way they had taught her, using her ownership as a cover. She spent the next hour preparing her gear. The rhythmic check of her ceramic blades and suppressed sidearm ground her. She would lure Han Jae-ol to the rooftop garden under the guise of a security brief. She would be the shield that Jun-suk couldn't be, removing the cancer before it reached the heart of the family. As she stepped into the elevator, she saw her reflection in the mirrored walls. The denim-clad girl from the shipping yard was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that sometimes, to protect the king, the shadow must act without his permission. She was about to commit a mutiny of loyalty, and if she failed, she wouldn't just be a ghost. She would be a traitor in Jun-suk's eyes. But as the doors opened to the night air, her hand was steady. She wasn't just his property anymore. She was the law. The betrayal Amara had uncovered was a wildfire she couldn't contain. It was meant to incinerate the king himself. Han Jae-ol's disappearance had been the final signal. He hadn't just fled. He had lured Jun-suk into a peace summit at a decommissioned shipyard, a trap designed to decapitate the Kong family leadership in one clean stroke. By the time Amara reached the perimeter, the night air was already heavy with the scent of cordite and burning rubber. Jun-suk's security detail had been decimated, pinned down behind a wall of shipping containers. Through her tactical headset, the audio was a chaotic mess of gunfire and Han Jae-ol's voice over the radio, mocking his former mentor. Amara didn't wait for backup. She didn't call for permission. She moved through the shadows of the yard like a predatory ghost, her denim jacket a dark blur against the rusted steel. This was her element, the grit, the grease, and the high-stakes geometry of a gunfight. She neutralized the first two snipers with silent, surgical efficiency, her ceramic blades finding the gaps in their armor before they could register her presence. In the center of the yard, Jun-suk was cornered, his bespoke suit torn and his sidearm empty. Han Jae-ol stood 10 paces away, a triumphant sneer on his face as he raised his pistol to finish the vow of death. "The game is over, Jun-suk," Han Jae-ol spat. "In chess, the king has nowhere to run. But the king has a shadow," a voice growled from the darkness. Amara erupted from behind a container, a flashbang grenade in her hand. The world turned into a blinding white scream. Before the echo could fade, she was a whirlwind of disciplined aggression. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession, not at Han Jae-ol, but at the fuel barrels behind his men. The resulting explosion flipped the tactical advantage in a heartbeat. She reached Jun-suk's side as the smoke billowed, her hand gripping his shoulder to pull him behind cover. For the first time she saw fear in his eyes, not of death, but of the realization that he had been blind to the rot in his own house. "Stay low," Amara commanded, her voice a calm, lethal anchor in the chaos. She laid down a suppressive wall of fire, moving with a fluid grace that made the director's mercenaries look like amateurs. One by one she picked them off, her focus so intense it felt as though time had slowed. When the last of Han Jaeol's men fled into the fog, Amara stood over the wounded traitor, her weapon leveled at his heart. She didn't pull the trigger. She looked back at Jun-suk, who was standing up and brushing the soot from his sleeves, his expression unreadable. Amara handed him the spare magazine from her belt. "He's yours," she said, her breathing even. "But remember, you didn't survive because of your board. You survived because of me." In the cold moonlight, the dynamic of ownership finally shattered. Jun-suk looked at her, not as his property, and not even just as his enforcer. He looked at her as his savior. The shadow had stepped out of the darkness, and the king realized he was no longer the only one who dictated the moves. The shipyard extraction had been a skirmish. The warehouse on the edge of Incheon was the endgame. Rain lashed against the corrugated metal roof, a relentless drumming that masked the sound of Amara's boots as she scaled the rusted catwalks. Below, the director stood surrounded by his remaining council, the architects of the bounty on her head. They were huddled over maps and ledgers, trying to salvage a sinking empire, unaware that the shadow was already breathing their air. Amara looked down at the scene, her mind clicking through the variables. Jun-suk had taught her that the board was never static. To win, you didn't just strike the king. You removed the squares he intended to move to. She checked her watch. 10 minutes. That was the window before the director's reinforcements arrived. She began the dismantling. Her first move was the lights. She didn't just cut the power. She used a small thermite charge to fuse the breakers, plunging the warehouse into a thick, disorienting darkness. In the chaos of the sudden blackout, she dropped from the catwalk like a ghost. She didn't use a gun. The muzzle flashes would give her away. Instead, she used the environment. A heavy crate triggered by a cut cable crushed the primary exit. A steam pipe ruptured by a silenced shot created a scalding curtain that divided the director from his guards. Amara moved through the steam with a cold, disciplined aggression. She was a surgeon of the shadows. One guard felt a blade at his throat before he could raise his rifle. Another was pulled into the darkness of a shipping container with a silent snap of his neck. She was playing 3 moves ahead, anticipating their panic, steering them into the traps she had set in the dark. At the 5-minute mark, the director was alone. He stood in the center of the floor, waving a gold-plated pistol at shadows, his poise completely shattered. "Show yourself," he shrieked, the sound echoing off the steel walls. "I'll double the bounty. I'll give you a city." Amara stepped out of the steam, her denim jacket torn and her cargo pants stained with oil and blood, but her expression was one of terrifyingly calm focus. She didn't look like a waitress or a ghost anymore. She looked like the checkmate Jun-suk had been waiting for. "The bounty is closed," Amara said, her voice a low, final vibration. She didn't rush him. She moved with the poise he had ingrained in her, a weapon of high society grace and street-level lethality. When the director fired, she had already pivoted, the bullet whizzing past her ear as she closed the distance. She disarmed him with a sickening pop of his wrist, the gold pistol clattering away into the shadows. She didn't kill him. Instead, she forced him to his knees just as the warehouse doors groaned open. Kang Jun-suk stepped in, his wire-rimmed glasses back on, his suit pristine. He looked at the carnage, then at Amara, who held the director by the collar. 9 minutes and 40 seconds, Jun-suk noted, his voice devoid of surprise but heavy with a new profound respect. "The board is clear," Amara replied, her gaze meeting his. "The game is yours." In the cold silence of the warehouse, the CEO didn't look at the defeated director. He looked at the woman who had mastered his game, realizing that the shadow hadn't just protected the empire. She had won it. 6 months later, the glass towers of Seoul's skyline shimmered like a fractured diamond under a summer moon. Inside the grand ballroom of the Kong headquarters, the atmosphere was no longer thick with the scent of gunpowder, but with the heady aroma of rare orchids and high-stakes success. Amara stood on the balcony overlooking the Han River, her silhouette sharp against the city lights. She wore a bespoke suit of deep charcoal, tailored with the same precision Jun-suk applied to his business mergers. The cargo pants and denim were gone, but the disciplined aggression remained, now refined into a quiet, terrifying grace. The doors behind her opened, and the rhythmic click of expensive heels announced Madame Sunhee. The matriarch walked to Amara's side, placing a hand on her arm. "You are not looking for the shadows anymore, child," Sunhee murmured. "You have become the light that reveals them." Amara offered a small, rare smile, one of a woman who was no longer running from her past, but had used its fire to forge a future. Inside, the music faded as Kang Jun-suk stepped onto the dais. He didn't wear his glasses. He hadn't worn them in public for months. He looked out at the gathered elite, the governors, the CEOs, and the remaining syndicate heads, and his gaze was steady, unblinking, and predatory. For years, the Kang Group has operated on the logic of the board. Jun-suk's voice boomed, a low vibration that commanded absolute silence. "We calculated our moves in the dark. But every king needs a foundation that cannot be shaken." He gestured toward the balcony. "Amara Cole saved the heart of this family when I was blind to the rot within it. She didn't do it because she was a ghost or a servant. She did it because she is a warrior." Amara stepped into the room, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. There was no whispering, only a heavy, palpable respect born of fear. They knew her name. They had heard of the 10 minutes in the warehouse and the extraction at the shipyard. Jun-suk met her halfway, taking her hand. He didn't look at her as a piece of property or a debt to be collected. He looked at her as his equal. "I once told her I owned her." He addressed the room, his voice dropping into a lethal chill. "I was wrong. We are the architects of a new reign. To touch her is to touch me. To defy her is to invite the end of your world." In the center of the empire, the contract of ownership was officially burned. Amara Cole wasn't a shadow anymore. She was the most feared name in the underworld, the woman who had crowned herself beside a king. Together they didn't just play the game. They owned the board. The ghost had finally come home, and the city of Seoul belonged to her.